I think it's one of the most fundamentals or most important things that you could possibly practice in your life. What's up? We're at the Rocky Steps, or the museum steps in Philadelphia. Like the last video we had was in Times Square, and you see like all the different billboards and you see all the distractions and everything, and we talked about business and how like the system works and basically marketing and sales and like all of these different things. But I think it's really good to take a step back and kind of talk more about like a bit more of a simple kind of thing, but also positive action and being gentle with life. And so positive action is something that is talked about, I believe, in The Power of Now, but also in the Bhagavad Gita, right? So Krishna teaches how basically you have the right to the action, but not to the fruit of the action. And so the fruit of the action, if you take a look at like when this was written, I don't know when the Bhagavad Gita was written. Maybe it was like, I don't know, thousands of years ago, or definitely thousands of years ago, right? And when this was written, like most of the time, it wasn't like modern society where we have like all these different businesses and places that we work, or businesses that we're trying to create or build or contain, right? We have basically like farming. Like back in the day, it was like what everybody did was mainly farming, right? So they would like focus on the seed, and like that's what you basically have the right to the action. And the right to the action is like putting the seed on the ground and being able to put the soil on the seed, and then coming back the next day and watering the seed, right? But you don't have the right to like grow, basically. Like you can't force the plant to grow. And so there is this thing like power versus force, right? And so power is like a very kind of like gentle energy. It's a very calm energy. It's an energy that like doesn't try to get something out of the situation, doesn't try to like get something out of whatever it's doing. It's like the moment in itself is the end in itself. What you're doing in the moment is the reward within itself, rather than you looking for something out of that action, right? And so that's what it means by like you have the right to the action, but not to the fruit of the action. But back in the day, it would be like a farm. Like if you're trying to grow corn, right? You would plant the corn, you would water the corn, but like that was all that you could do. You couldn't really like, do anything else. Like you couldn't like force the plant to grow. And so you have the right to the action, but not to the fruit of that action. And so what this means is almost like being present to the moment and being able to just focus on that moment and being able to do the best that you possibly can in that moment. You can't like do better than your best, right? And one of the movies that I love is Eddie the Eagle. And in Eddie the Eagle, you basically have Eddie who wants to be in the Olympics, and he wants to do like ski jumping in the Olympics, and nobody really like believes that he can do that. There's another great book called Think and Grow Rich, and I really hate this book. I just don't like it. I read it once and I just like never liked it, but it gives you a lot of real life examples of people that have succeeded in life. This was written like in the, I think, 1940s. So it's a lot of like older entrepreneurs like Carnegie, right, from Pittsburgh, I believe. And he would talk about Ford and all this stuff, and like Thomas Edison. And he was like one of the best inventors at the time. Or now you would think of like Elon Musk maybe, right? Or like Jeff Bezos. Back then you had like Carnegie and Rockefeller and Ford, right? And so what's interesting about this though, and one of the passages in the book, or the main focus of the book is, or the main message is, that if you believe in something without a doubt, it will happen. And so that's the whole point of that book, is like believe something without a doubt. And so there's a story in that book about this guy. I think it was like Thomas Bell is the name. I don't know if that's the actual name. I'm pretty sure the last name is Bell. And he wanted to work with Thomas Edison during that time. Like Thomas Edison was in like Trenton, New Jersey, and he was just like, I want to work with Thomas Edison. And I don't know where he lived. Like maybe he lived in like Philly, maybe he lived in New York or like somewhere else in the country. And he was like, I want to work with Edison. Like that is my mission. My mission is to work with Edison. And he had no doubt in his mind that that was going to happen for some reason. And so he went to Trenton, in New Jersey, and he like knocked on Edison's door, and he was like, yo, I want to work with you. And Edison was like, who is this homeless man? Like, get away. Like, I don't know you. You're not going to get a job. Like, just no. Okay. And so he kept insisting, kept being persistent, because in his mind, there was no doubt that this was going to happen. And so he was persistent. He kept going. He kept applying. And finally, he landed a job. Edison was just finally like, you know what? Fine, dude. Fine. You can work in the mailroom. It was like the lowest level job, but his dream kind of came true, right? He was working for Thomas Edison finally. And Thomas Edison was coming up with new inventions at the time. And he had like different salespeople on his team. And when he came out with this new invention, the people on his team like didn't really want to sell it. They didn't really see the vision for it. They didn't really know like what he was trying to do with it. They didn't really believe in it. And so they said, you know what, like we don't really want to sell this. We don't think it's going to be successful. But this guy, Thomas Bell, was like, yo, I'll sell it. I understand the vision. I know what it is. I'll sell it. I know how to sell this. And so he started selling this new product, this new invention. And the whole idea is that that invention ended up being the phone or something like that, or maybe like the telegram, but it eventually evolved to the phone. And then that guy, Bell, became like, you know, a really successful or famous person, I believe, in history. I don't know if this is like a complete true story or not, but it is in that book. This is why I don't completely love that book, but it's a pretty good one, right? And so that was one of the things that I got from it. Another thing that I actually got from that book was he talked about like the Great Depression in the 1930s. So that was one of the biggest economic repressions, right? Or depressions in the country. And so he talked about how people, even during that time, right? And today we're having like a lot of like things like that happening, right? Where we have a lot of different, we have a lot of inflation going on. We have a lot of like economic turmoil throughout the country and things like that. And people are not feeling super hopeful about the economy in certain aspects, right? But even during the Great Depression, this is what, you know, in Think and Grow Rich, again, I don't really like that book, but if you go read it, this is one of the best things that I got from it, at least, and I still remember it. It's kind of funny how like, it's like you kind of like don't like the book, but for some reason it did impact you and has like big messages that you kind of got from it and kept from it. And so that was one of the second messages that I got from it, was basically that like even during that time, there was people that became wealthy during the Great Depression. You could think about like the 1980s too, where there was like, I believe there was a repression during that time. And there was technologies that came out during that time and businesses that came out during that time that are now some of the most successful companies in the world. And so I think that that's kind of interesting as well. But the example that they gave was basically like somebody would work a ton during that time to actually still become wealthy. And so they would work at like delivering newspapers in the morning. Then they would work like as a nurse or something like that, or more like, you know, a better career there. And then they would work as like a waiter, right, at a diner or something like that at night. And they were still able to move forward and be successful even during that time. And so I think that that's really, really important. But today, again, we're talking about being gentle with life and the main relationship that you have in life, which would be the relationship with life itself, the relationship with existence, with the experience of existence, the relationship with God even, right? And so Jesus talks about how like a town built on a hill cannot be hidden. So I think that this is really a really interesting concept. I think a lot of the times when like bad things happen to us, right? It's like something bad happens, and let's say like, you know, some grief happens or some loss happens in your life. Like maybe you got fired from a job, or maybe you got let go, or maybe you left a job, or maybe you had a breakup, or you're going through a divorce. Like I have a few friends of mine that are going through divorces, right? And I think that that's like really painful, and it's kind of like a loss, right? And so when you're dealing with that, it can be really, really hard. And so the first thing that you try to kind of do a lot of times in these situations is like blame the other person and try to like put the other person down and or blame the team and blame the business, right? And blame all your boss and stuff like that. And so I don't think that that's extremely helpful. And a lot of the times it's like you could go in a downward spiral, right? It's like something bad happens. You're a perfectionist like me, right? Like I try my best to let it go, not be super perfect, but it's like, you know, one bad thing happens and then like that causes you to react and get triggered maybe, and then another bad thing happens and then another bad thing happens, and you just like go in this downward kind of spiral, and especially when you're dealing with grief or dealing with loss or dealing with these things. And the best thing that you can do is kind of like do the opposite of that. So start stacking small wins, right? It's like you do one right thing and then you do another right thing and then you're feeling good, and because you're feeling good you do another right thing, and so it's like an upward kind of spiral. And so you could do this by doing the winner effect. And the winner effect is actually kind of like your integrity. It's like keeping your word to yourself. What you say you're going to do, you go ahead and do that thing, right? And so you just say like something really, really simple, like even just waking up, like brushing your teeth, getting ready for the day. You just win, boom, win. Then you like make your bed, win. Then you like make coffee, you get some coffee, you get some breakfast, you eat something healthy, right? Win. And so little by little, you start like building yourself back up, and you start having integrity with yourself and feeling good. And so like the more that you feel good, the more that you want to do, and the more activities that you kind of like want to do. And then you're in this upward kind of spiral rather than going in this downward spiral. It's like something bad happens, then another bad thing happens, then another bad thing happens, and you react, and then you feel bad, and then because you feel bad, you get in another, you know, this downward spiral. And so turn it around by having winner effect. I think what can really, really help with this is accountability. We're building a mastermind group right now. And if you click the link below and sign up for a call, you'll be able to get into the mastermind group early. And I think it could be very, very, very beneficial if you're looking for accountability and you're looking for a group to keep you accountable, so that each week we're doing different goals, we're doing different exercises, and we're just free flowing as well, and like letting each other kind of like get out the things that we need to get out. And this would really, really help you. So click the link below to get into the mastermind. There's also one-on-ones that are being offered, and there's a digital program that's coming out soon that you'll get access to if you join the mastermind. Other than that though, what I want to talk about is letting go and the book Power versus Force. And so in Power versus Force, this is by David R. Hawkins, and you can kind of see the difference between the energies of power, right? And so the energy of power is basically like a very calm energy, right? It's an energy that's just like, just giving. It's an energy that's just like transparent. It's very gentle, right? It doesn't want anything out of the situation. And then there's another energy that's kind of forceful, that's angry, that's like pessimistic, that's like kind of like war, right? Or it's like trying to force yourself, right, to do something. And in the last video, we talked about working 100 hours and how you could still be successful even working 100 hours today, right? But how are you able to do that, right? And a lot of the times it's going to be by having positive action. Positive action is something that in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna talks about, right? And so it's about not creating any more pain for life on the outside. And so in that book, the Bhagavad Gita, they talk a lot about like reincarnation. And in the way that I understand it, right, it's not really that like your body is going to be incarnated in the next lifetime into another body, right? It's basically that the energy of pain or the energy of happiness and the energy of letting go and the energy of peace, that gets kind of like passed on. So it's almost like generational trauma. If you think about it, right, it's almost like somebody got hurt or an event happened. And so this is what happens when you study psychology, right? Like this is what they would talk about. If there's an event that happens or a situation that happens where it creates an energetic reaction in your body, you will basically if it's too much, right, and you can't handle it and you can't let it go within that moment, you're going to repress or suppress that energy or that emotion or that situation or that event. And so you put it away. You're like, if you repress something, it's basically like, oh, this happened, but like, I don't have time to deal with it right now. Like, I still have to like do stuff in the practical sense of life. I still have a lot to do. And so I'm going to put it over here and kind of deal with it later. If you suppress something, it's like you put it away. You're like, it's never happened. It's far away. Never happened. I'm just not going to deal with it. I don't have the time. Like, I don't know how. Like, I'm just going to put it over there. And so when you speak with like a therapist or psychiatrist, a lot of times they'll try to grab that, right? They'll try to get the suppressive events that happened or that suppressed kind of energy and emotion and bring it back out so that you can actually face it and that you can actually like deal with it and let it go. And so in the letting go technique, a lot of the times you gotta kind of like let go of the emotions that you're feeling. And there's also congruency, right? And so being congruent is basically acting and saying and thinking how you're feeling. You're not like trying to change how you're feeling, right? And so there's a contradicting kind of point to this, which comes from Viktor Frankl in Man's Search for Meaning. I remember reading this book at a really crucial point in my life, right? And I suggest you read this book, even if you're going through something right now, or if you're not going through something, you could still read the book. And I think it could be very, very powerful to try and prevent certain events in your life. But life is up and down. There's always things that are going to happen. And it's about, how you can get back up and how you can get back up faster, learning from the mistakes that you made and actually growing as a person. And so life will give you whatever you need for the evolution of your consciousness. It won't give you a lot of the times what you want. It will give you what you need for you to grow as a person. And so life kind of wants you to come back home. It wants you to have a relationship with life itself, have a relationship with God, have a relationship with the experience of existence itself, on the inside and on the outside, right? That's kind of what it wants from you. It wants you just to have a relationship with it. And when it's a good relationship that you have with life, and again, that becomes the primary relationship in life. Primary relationship in life is the relationship with life itself. And so when Jesus talks about, right, a lot of times when bad things happen, we tend to hide. We tend to like go away. We tend to just be like, I traveled to Oregon. I traveled to across the country and lived there for 4 years. And yeah, I was traveling all in nature and we went through these amazing, amazing places, right? Like Crater Lake and Trillium Lake and Haystack Rock and all these beautiful, beautiful places. But I was also kind of hiding in a way. That's how I felt. Like, it was kind of like hiding out there. And I feel like this was a mistake. And I want to prevent that from happening to you. I think that when Jesus says something like, a town built on a hill cannot be hidden, or something like, when you light a lamp, you don't put it underneath a bowl, right? You let the lamp light the entire house. It means that you're not hiding you. It means that you're not hiding your truth. It means that you're being able to express yourself and you're able to just like be free and be happy or feel how you feel. There's different types of emotions and that's what I would say. It's like when you think about anger, right? There's almost like Inside Out 2 just came out. I'm excited to see it. And I love the first one, right? The first one is basically like you have these different emotions in your head, right? If you've seen it, the Pixar movie. But I think that in life, there are two types of anger, right? One anger, it's like you can choose almost to be angry in that situation because maybe you need to set a boundary. Like maybe somebody's doing something bad. Maybe somebody's hitting somebody you love or something like that. And you need to be like, hey, that's not okay. You get what I'm saying? But then there's also this other type of anger that you almost don't choose. It almost like takes over you. It almost like triggers you, right? Like you see this like, people getting triggered and stuff and like in traffic and stuff like that, where it's like they're reacting and they're trying to get more pain out of it. It's almost like this pain and this anger has taken over, and they're trying to get like more pain. And so there is this kind of energy. I think in life there's just two types of energy. It's like power, which is real power, and I would say like almost like life and calmness and being grateful and being gentle. And then there's this other type of force, right, which is like kind of angry and kind of trying to get something out of it. And yeah, I mean, that's just kind of like different. But I think you could also call that like ego, and you could also call that like the devil or evil, or like the other side would be good. You know what I mean? Like good and evil and stuff like that. And so you have like these different types of like energy. And so if you're hiding, it's almost like that's what that energy wants you to do. And when you study things like A New Earth, you'll see that like he talks a lot about ego and identifying who you are. And so in psychology, you have basically the word I. Like when you're a little kid, if you study like childhood development, right, you'll see like that the kid, when they're old enough to speak, they'll learn a few words at first. The first words that they learn are things like I. And they connect the word I with who they are. And then another one is like their name. So they learn their name. And so they connect that with who they are. So they'll say things like Johnny is hungry, right? To be like, yo, I'm hungry. You know, and so that's kind of like interesting. But as you get older, you start to identify these words. And I talked about language in the past, but I think that that is also really interesting to think about and dissect and understand. It's like if I'm trying to express myself or I'm trying to communicate something, a lot of the times it's going to be through sounds. It's going to be through air pressure. And so when I'm trying to communicate something, right, and I'm just trying to use sounds to communicate that thing, it's basically like pointing at what something is. It's like the example I always give is like, you know, did a tree exist before the word tree, right? And so if the word tree didn't exist, but first the tree was there, and then we decided that making that sound tree would point to what that actually is, it means that words are just signposts to what something is. And so don't get lost in the words, right? But get lost in like the concept. What is the person trying to communicate? What are they trying to actually say, right? What is the experience that they're pointing to with the language? And another thing is that when you study letting go, right, there's different levels of consciousness. You would have like guilt, right? And there's a story about guilt. There's a story about a woman, and she was just feeling really guilt and going through loss and feeling shameful and going through grief, right? And so in the book Letting Go, he'll go through each level of consciousness and actually give you different examples of what would happen and the different reactions that you would have based on the different level of consciousness. And so if the example that he gives for grief is about this old woman who lost her child, and in losing her child, she went into a lot of loss and a lot of grief. And so when she was in a lot of grief, she started to get angry at the world. She started having a bad relationship with life itself. You know, she would be like, why? Like, why, life? Why would you do this? Right? And she started to get angry and blaming the people around her. She started blaming her husband. She started blaming her other two children, right? And so she became more and more in this grief and she couldn't get out of it. She couldn't get out of it. And then she ended up like harming her husband, right? And the kids like weren't feeling safe around her. And so she lost her husband and she lost her other children. And so it's a really, really horrible story. But it's like kind of like a warning, or to tell you, right? That if you're going through loss right now, if something really bad kind of happens, you had one of those events or situations happen to you, is that if you get lost in the grief, if you kind of stay in that grief, it's just going to bring more of that type of energy. It's almost like why, like the news, like if you watch the news, right? Like that's all that they kind of talk about, is a lot of the times is fear and anger. It's like somebody robbed, somebody killed somebody. It's like all this fear and anger that they're trying to get you to react to. And mostly it's because even in the books like Power versus Force or Letting Go, he'll talk about how that's the predominant level of consciousness in the world today. Basically, you just have fear and anger. Most people are kind of like at those levels, right? And I would say, like, even if you were somebody who studied a lot of the, spiritual, like scripture and stuff like that for a really long time, it's like it doesn't matter. Even if you believe you're like spiritually awakened or enlightened or something like that, which I don't think is completely true, but even if you have done that, you still live in a world of people that have not studied that. You still live in a world where people don't care about that. And so you're going to have a lot of problems because you're still going to kind of like butt heads with people. Not everybody's going to believe exactly what you believe. And I think that that's completely fine. But it's also really good to think about all the different things that are said, like in the Bhagavad Gita, in the Bible, or in the Tao Te Ching. So the Tao Te Ching is also like Chinese scripture, and it was written like 400 years before, Jesus. And it's a very simple book. It's very poetic, and it's very simple. Like I said, it like each page is like half a page. Some pages are like one paragraph or a couple sentences. And it'll talk about things like do without doing, which is kind of paradoxical or contradicting. But it's like, can you take positive action, right? And so in letting go, you would go in through the different emotions that came up throughout your life from different events and different things that have been either repressed or suppressed, right? In psychology, they talk about repression and suppression of different events and emotions. And you can go into that and let it go. And a lot of the times letting go is kind of sitting by yourself alone and crying, right? Me growing up, like I remember it's kind of like an old school thing, but it's like men don't cry. Men are not supposed to cry, right? And I think that that's powerful to be like strong, right? Like Rocky, and just like being able to go up the steps and having that resilience, right? And facing your resistance. Like Stephen Pressfield in Turning Pro talks a lot about resistance. He says that in a lot of different, ancient scripture and philosophy, there's this thing that's pushing us away from everything that we want, right? It's pushing us away, and he calls that resistance. And I remember reading that. It was one of the first times that I thought about resistance or came across this idea of resistance. It says whenever you're trying to do anything in life, you're always going to face this resistance. There's just something that is trying to keep you away, is trying to stop you from doing the things that are actually going to help you or help the world. And you have to kind of face that resistance. You have to like beat that resistance and go against it. But we talked at the beginning how there's like basically an enlightened plant is the flower, and how an enlightened rock would be like a crystal that's transparent to the light. And so if you're being gentle with life because you're having a good relationship with life, and that's the primary relationship that you have in life, is the relationship with life itself, you're going to be gentle, and life is going to be gentle with you. But if you want war, life is going to give you war. And so in life you have a lot of different like group think and things like that, where people like group together. And you could see this in World War II, like Viktor Frankl from Man's Search for Meaning. And Viktor Frankl, the author of Man's Search for Meaning, was a psychiatrist in World War II. And he talked a lot about what he learned through his experience in the Nazi concentration camps. And his experience was really, really terrifying. I mean, I would think it was one of the possibly the most horrific experience, but you could still see it today in the world, right? And so he goes through this, and basically his family gets taken away from him. Everything gets taken away from him. His clothes gets taken away. He gets enslaved. He gets put in this concentration camp. And the last freedom, this is what he learned from that experience, from those horrific experience that a human could possibly go through. He said that when everything gets taken away from you, the last freedom that you have as a human being is your ability to choose how you're going to react to that situation. This is something that actually I was just talking to my parents about, and my stepdad actually said that to me, and I thought it was really powerful. And I love him, and I think that that's a really, really great message. He says that when he wakes up, he chooses how he's going to be. He chooses to be happy. He chooses to just like laugh and make fun with people and just like have a good time with people, right? And so he wakes up and he chooses to be happy. And this is the last freedom that you have. And it's a bit contradicting to the idea of congruence, of just being basically like just however you're feeling is how I'm going to react, or it's how I'm going to be. But also it's almost like being transparent to any type of energy that's coming your way. And so if somebody's like angry at you or something like that, you're not a wall that's pushing back the energy. You're actually letting it flow through you. So it's almost like anything could happen, any situation, and it just goes right through you. It doesn't like bounce back and get triggered or create more of that negativity. And I think that that is really, really powerful as well. So in the Bhagavad Gita, when he talks about positive action and reincarnation and how that pain is being like reincarnated into basically the next generation, or basically somebody went through an event, had an emotional reaction within their body, and then they're actually almost acting from that emotional state as well, right? And so they're going to go and like let's say, you know, you were hit as a child or something like that. Well, then you're carrying that pain with you, and then you go on and you kind of like possibly act out that pain again, and so the pain just keeps going, right? And so it gets kind of like reincarnated in a way. But positive action can happen when you go from grief, and how like everybody's kind of in a state of fear and anger, but above that you have courage, you have desire, you have acceptance. And so I think that that's really, really powerful too. Acceptance and willingness. And acceptance could actually just be you just accepting the way things are. And so in The Power of Now, Eckhart Tolle talks a lot about how just accepting, a lot of the times when you're having a hard time in life, right? It's because you're not accepting what is, right? Whatever uncovered or whatever came up, it's like you just want to accept everything how it is. And in the Tao Te Ching, they talk about how you just love everything. Like Jesus would say, love thy enemy, right? And that would be like loving somebody who hates you, right? He says, what reward will you get if you love those who love you, right? He's like, don't even the tax collectors do that? Isn't it better for you to love those who you hate? And therefore, you don't have any hate. You don't have any enemies. But in the Tao Te Ching, they say love everything. It's not just loving your enemy. It's about loving everything, like everything around you. The chair that you're sitting in, the computer screen, or your phone screen. Loving all the people around you. Loving the floor. Loving these steps. Loving the museum. Loving the buildings. Loving Philly. Like loving everything. And so you don't really have hate in your heart. And you almost don't have any enemies. And everything becomes transparent to you, right? And so I think that that is really, really powerful. And I think it's really interesting how there's kind of like similar concepts in all of these different teachings. And another thing that I want to talk about is the Way of the Peaceful Warrior. And in Way of the Peaceful Warrior, he talks a lot about the different things that you have to do in order to be a peaceful warrior. And what I love about it is that sometimes you connect with Dan. When you read the book for the first time, you kind of connect with Dan. And you're like, I feel like Dan, I feel like Dan is right. And then by the end of the book, you might actually relate more to Socrates. Like I was on a flight to Miami recently, and I read Way of the Peaceful Warrior, and I loved how funny it was. Like it was just really, really funny. Like I couldn't stop laughing at how funny it was, and how Socrates would poke fun at Dan, and Dan would just like get angry about it, right? And like I just thought it was so funny. And the first time reading that, I was like kind of angry, like I wasn't really like laughing at everything. Like I thought the jokes were kind of stupid, but now it's like I read it back and I'm like, man, I relate to Socrates. Like this is super funny. All of the jokes that he says. And so one of the passages in that book is that Dan is hanging out with Joy and Socrates. And Joy is like one of Socrates' old students. And she's kind of like a peaceful warrior. Socrates is kind of a peaceful warrior. And Dan is just starting to learn these things. And so they go out for a picnic and it starts raining. And Dan just gets really angry. He's just like, man, we worked on this picnic and it was supposed to be really nice. And you guys worked really hard on it and now it's ruined. It's raining. This is ruined. And Socrates and Joy are just like laughing. And they're just like rolling around in the leaves and they're just like enjoying life and being happy and laughing, right? And it's almost like, and Dan's like, how could you be laughing? How could you be happy at a time like this? It ruined Joy's picnic. The picnic she worked so hard on. And they're just kind of laughing and having fun. It's because like Dan is so uptight, right? That you can't like let go of things that you can't control. And so it's like there's so many things in life that you're not going to be able to control. And it would be very, very good for you just to let go. And so how is it possible to learn that technique? And so there is like the trauma release, right, that you can do. It's like it's like a meditation where you like go into the feelings, you feel the feelings completely, you let it go. There's breath work to it. But I think after a while of doing that, and after a while of dissolving all of that, possibly going up to certain different levels of consciousness, like on top of acceptance and willingness, you do have peace, love, and joy. I'm not saying that anybody is at that level, maybe they are, but if you are at those kind of levels, or even acceptance, you might want to start trying to do positive action. And positive action is basically, the best way that I could explain it is being gentle with life, being gentle with yourself, being gentle with everybody around you. And so almost that gentleness, right? Like if you're gentle with life, life will be gentle with you. If you are like angry with life, if you're forceful with life, if you want something out of it, then life is also going to be forceful with you. It's going to be angry with you. And so I think that that's a really interesting concept of positive action. I think it's one of the most fundamentals or most important things that you could possibly practice in your life if you have been doing all this other stuff like trauma release for a really long time, is positive action. So you're no longer creating more pain, right? You're coming from congruency, you're coming from gentleness, you're coming from like being chill, you're cool. And I think if you're struggling with this too, whether it's the winner effect and actually like being able to keep your word and have integrity, and how important that is, I think, right? And how bad it makes you feel when you don't keep your word to yourself, and when you don't have that integrity with yourself or with life, or that relationship with God or whatever, or the experience of existence, whatever you want to call it. It doesn't really matter if you believe in it or not. I'm just saying an experience with life, a relationship with life, right? And so if you're having that relationship with life and it's like a gentle kind of relationship, you're able to actually create that positive action in your life where you're just being really gentle, and you can feel kind of like this energy that's coming from power rather than force. And so in letting go, he'll go through different things, right? Like the different aspects of consciousness or the different levels, and how you would react differently during those things. Like if you get in a car accident and you're feeling angry and that's your predominant level of consciousness, you're going to get out of the car and get angry. If you're sad or fearful, right, you're going to be like, oh my God, I'm fearful, right? And if you're feeling like at peace, you might just be like, hey, is everybody okay? Maybe you might be aware and just like try your best to just like be at peace and like be calm throughout the situation. And so what kind of things are you getting back from doing this? Like Kanye has a song and he'll be like, when you try hard, that's when you die hard. Now, it could be a reference to the movie Die Hard, but it could also be like, that's interesting. It's an interesting experience that we could all share, right? When you're trying so hard to get something, or you're being super forceful with life to get something, or to get an end rather than just being in the moment, doing the thing that you love the most, right? Then you're trying to get something out of that moment and you're not present. And because you're not present, you're going to want something out of it, and that energy is going to be out of alignment with what life wants from you and what you want from life. And so I think it's really, really interesting for you to align with life. And so maybe it's not just to be happy all the time or to be laughing all the time, but it's to be congruent and aligned with life, right? And so there's different types of fear, and that's what I want to talk about next. There's basically like fear of like anxiety, right? And so there's different types of fear. There's evolutionary fear, and then there's fear almost like anxiety, where like you're just kind of sitting in bed or something like that, and then you're getting like these attacks. It's almost like you're being attacked from your own mind, right? And you're feeling like really horrible and you're feeling really bad, but it's like nothing is dangerous around you, right? There's no like immediate danger around you. There's no like bear attacking you. There's no like snake right there trying to attack you or anything, but you're still feeling anxious and you're still feeling fearful. And so this is kind of like, it's almost like a psychological fear, right? And so we all feel this to an extent. A lot of people feel it to a higher extent. And I would say that having positive action in your life would actually help you a lot with dealing with this psychological fear. Now, it might not help you completely, right? But it can help with that psychological fear. Now, there's evolutionary fear, and this is kind of like a trigger for danger, right? If you see a bear, you see a snake, and you run away and you feel fearful, like that is a proper response, right? But you should love all emotions and have a proper response too. We talked about how you can like the different types of anger, right? So you could choose to be angry. Somebody's like hitting someone you love. You're like, hey, don't do that. And you could like be angry in that moment, but it's like you're choosing almost to be angry. And it's not a triggered anger that it's like taking over you and acting out that anger, right? It's something that you choose. And so another book that I want to talk about is The Alchemist, and turning that pain, right, or that fear into love or into peace or into laughter, into joy, right? And so Eckhart Tolle will talk a lot about how there's this different emotions, but peace, love, and joy are actually an absence of emotion. It's almost like beyond emotion. It's almost like the observer behind the thoughts and emotions that's always there. It's like if you see if you're like an ocean, right, or a lake, and there's like on the surface there's waves and there's ripples, right, and it changes, but underneath the lake it's always still, it's always silent, right? And then another way of looking at it is like a ray of the sun. It's like nothing on earth would exist without the sun existing, right? And so in a way, we're all part of the light. We're all part of the sun because nothing else would exist without it. But you can believe, like, imagine a ray of the sun that believes that it's separate from the sun. And then there's another ray of the sun and it's fighting for its identity, and it's saying like, no, I'm the ray of the sun. No, I'm a better ray of the sun. It's like, you're all part of the sun. You get what I'm saying? It's just another way of looking at it. And so another way of looking at it is like time, and then like past and future, and then there's presence. But really, it's always just now. It's never not the present moment. And so if you're just focused on the right now, and you're not focused on an event that you're trying to, come up with in the next minute or so. And that's like something, there's a passage that I read recently from Eckhart Tolle. I've read it many, many times, but recently I read it again. And he says, do you have any problems? Right? And he says, do problems even exist? And could it be that you're identified with all the problems in your life, and you've put so much effort and so much time, so much energy into building this identity of the problems that you have in your life that you're afraid to let go of them? And do they even exist? And the first time you hear this, you kind of get angry. You're like, of course I have problems. I have bills to pay. I got to pay for my flights. I got to like do a video. I got to like, keep growing my business. Like, what are you talking about? I have a ton of problems. But he says, narrow your life down to this moment. You might have a family, right? Or you might just have gone through something horrible. You might have just had a horrible event happen, right? You might be getting a divorce or something, and it's really horrible, right? Or you might have just lost a job. You might have got fired. Or you might have left a job and you're in between jobs or something like that, right? It's really, really horrible to go through that. But he says if you narrow your life down to this very second, not 10 minutes from now, not an hour from now, not next month, not a year from now, but right now, as you're watching this right now, do you have any problems right now? So is the problem something that you're dwelling on without taking any action on it? Right? So it's like you have things that you have to do, and you have things that you could just accept and let go of. And that's all there is. You either deal with it now, or you let it go, or it's going to come up later. And so a lot of like anxiety also comes from that. It's like thinking about the future and trying to solve a problem that's not here to solve yet. That problem hasn't arisen yet. That problem isn't here to solve. And so by you trying to mentally solve a problem before it's right in front of you, you actually create anxiety. I think that that's almost also really interesting. Now, this isn't like a solution, but this is helpful. It's helpful to look at these things and understand these things and apply them in your life. If you're trying to be a leader, if you are a leader, right? I think that this could be really, really powerful. There are two books that I really, really love about leadership. I'll talk about Multipliers by Liz Wiseman, and I'll talk about what I learned from an experience that I had at one of my jobs in a leadership training, and something that I learned about engagement from there. And then there's also 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. And these are kind of like, the 7 habits are kind of like laws, right? And he says that he even tries to follow them. Just because he wrote the book doesn't mean that he follows every single one perfectly, right? It's like you try to your best to follow those things because you know that that's the right thing to do, but you still struggle with it. Like I still have resistance, right? But I fight the resistance. I go through the resistance. I get better results than a lot of people, right? And so that's why I'm somebody that could talk about this. And also, like, we've been traveling, teaching this for the last 5 years, right? We've gone all over the country doing this. So it's really, really cool. I'll show you some of the videos here, right? Of all the different places we've been, the different things that we've talked about. And so Multipliers by Liz Wiseman talks a lot about how there's different types of leaders. There's 2 types of leaders that she found in her studies. And so she went throughout the country or throughout the world, and she studied the top leaders, top performing leaders in each industry or in a lot of different businesses like Apple and Google. And she said that there's two types of leaders that she found. One leader is somebody who is a diminisher. They try to like diminish their team. They think that they're the only ones that could do it. They think that they're the smartest, and they're like the only ones that could do it. And so they're just like, oh, well, you can't do it, let me do it. It's like, oh, if you want something done right, you got to do it yourself, right? And you put the person down. And then there's another type of leader. I'm sure you've encountered many of these people. And then there's another type of leader that is the multiplier. And the multiplier tries to multiply their skill, multiply their knowledge, and share it and make the team members smarter, right? By teaching them what they know, they multiply themselves. And in multiplying themselves, they actually increase the engagement and they increase the intelligence in the team. And so the business grows because everybody's becoming smarter. And so these are the two types of different leaders. I suggest you go read that book, Multipliers by Liz Wiseman. And there's another great thing that I want to touch base here. And it's basically like in life, when you can't really be present in a moment, right? Or in a situation. You have your sense perception telling you, hey, your hearing, your sight, your touch, your smell, your taste, all these different senses are telling you what's going on the outside. And sometimes you can't be present all the time. And if you can't be present in a certain situation, there's only 3 sane things that you can do. The first thing that you can do is accept it. Just accept it. Just like, you know what? I'm just going to accept. And he says a lot of problems, like Eckhart Tolle will say, a lot of the problems that you'll have come from non-acceptance of what is. If you can accept everything as it is, you'll be able to just be present and just accept it, everything as it is, every little thing. And you'll feel at peace. Another way to do it though, let's say that's not working, right? And you're just like, man, I'm trying to accept it, but I can't. So you change it. You try to change the situation. You try to talk to that person. You try to change the actual outside situation, the environment, right? And so you change things around. You change team members around. You try to talk to the team member. You try to do all these different things, right? And so that would be a different way of becoming more peaceful or feeling better, is by changing the situation. And then there's a third thing that you can do. If you try to change it, you try to accept it, and none of these work, the third thing that you can do is remove yourself from the situation. You might have to just like step away. You might have to go, I have to go. I can't be present. I can't be happy. I'm very angry and pessimistic. I kind of have to remove myself from this environment. And so those would be the 3 things that you can do. And so in 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Stephen Covey has a lot of different things that you can kind of abide by, or these different laws, right? It's like one of them is like start with the end in mind. And so when you start with the end in mind, it's almost like you know where you want to go, you have a vision. And so in the future, right, there will be like different things, like what will replace work will be actually enjoyment and enthusiasm and acceptance. And so you're going to do what you enjoy, and you're going to do what you're enthusiastic about. And the best thing is to be enthusiastic about what you're doing, because enthusiasm is basically like you're accepting what you're doing, but you're also honoring the step that you're taking right now. And you have a vision. You know where you're going, but you're not like lost in where you're trying to get to. You're just focused on the step you're taking right now, and you're doing the best that you can right now. It's almost like when Krishna says you have the right to your action, but not to the fruit of the action, right? It's almost like you're planting the seed. And so you put all your focus on planting the seed, right? And you put your full focus and your energy and your gentleness on patting down the dirt and using the best dirt that you can. And then you go and you use the best water that you can, and you make sure to water the plant every day. But you're not focused on the fruit. You're really just focused on doing the best in that moment. Everything else is up to life. Everything else you can let go of. You could let go of the control, right? And let life live. And so this is a very, very important concept, is that you don't live your life, or you don't have a life. Life lives you. You are life. So what do I mean by this? The best example that I have ever found is also from The Power of Now in Eckhart Tolle. And he talks about how when somebody loses consciousness, like let's say I pass out right now from heat stroke, right? Or somebody passes out. A lot of the times what we say is that that person lost consciousness, right? You say, well, they lost consciousness. But that's not true. The truth is, follow this, okay? The truth is that consciousness, you can't lose, because that's what you are. You are consciousness. So consciousness, and when you pass out, it's not that you lost consciousness, it's that consciousness lost you almost. It's almost like consciousness can't animate itself through your body at that moment, right? And so consciousness is something that is animating all of us. It's something that's connected to everything. In the Tao Te Ching, they talk about everything, right? So these are all like atoms and stuff, like in the world. One day, like the earth is going to explode, right? And we're all going to go back to being galactic or whatever, or being back in the solar system. And it's all going to be one experience, one thing. It's like we're one solar system, we're one earth. It's all one experience, and it's not multiple experiences, right? It's one consciousness. So you don't lose consciousness. It's almost like consciousness can't animate you to create art, or to live truth into the world, or bring truth into the world, right? Or just being able to like speak, or do whatever, like do an activity, manifest a kickflip on a skateboard. And so when you're born, it's almost like everything is dark and you don't know anything. And so the more that you connect with a thing, person, or activity through your attention, the more that you uncover what's actually happening there. You're like, well, I get what's happening there. It's like for example, one of the best examples that I always give is skateboarding. If you don't know how to skateboard, right, you're basically going to be afraid. It's like you fear what you don't know. And that's another thing. It's like fearing what you don't know. And the reason why you're fearful about what you don't know is because you don't understand it. And that's very, very hard, right? Because you're just like scared. You're like, imagine you want to skateboard, but you've never been on a skateboard. You're like fearful of it. You're like, what if I fall? What if I break my leg or something? It's like, oh, I don't know how to do that. I'm just not going to do that, right? But if you're good at it, if you put the focus and attention and energy and time to learning a kickflip on a skateboard, and you're able to manifest that into the world, you'll be able to do the kickflip, and everybody will be like, oh my God, that's so cool, you did a kickflip. And then you won't be fearful. Like, you don't fear that activity, you don't fear that person, you don't fear that thing, because you understand it, right? And so I think that that's really, really powerful. And also being able to push your edge, to do your best, do your personal best, right? And like the movie Eddie the Eagle, where he tries to be an Olympic ski jumper, and he does like 43 meters, and everybody's like looking at him like, dude, that's the worst in the world, right? But it's his best, it's his personal best. And Hugh Jackman's like his coach, and he's like, personal best, and we're a disgrace, right? I think it's a really, really cool thing, because you're trying the best that you can. And that's like the only thing that you can do, is really, really try the best that you possibly can. You can't go above your best. So you just try the best that you can. And so I think that that's really, really powerful as well.